My wife and partner foreclosed my house for nothing. My revenge cost them everything. I used to think I understood structural integrity, steel grades, load-bearing calculations, the precise angle where tension becomes compression. I had degrees from MIT, 15 years of building things that didn't fall down. But nothing in my engineering background prepared me for the moment when I discovered that the foundation of my own life had been hollowed out from inside. Let me back up. The day it all came apart started like any other Tuesday. I was standing on the construction site of what I'd been calling Vantage Point for the past 18 months. My masterpiece, my legacy, the kind of residential structure that would make other architects weep with envy or rage, depending on their level of insecurity. The morning sun was hitting the skeletal framework just right, casting shadows that looked like a mathematical proof written in steel and concrete. I was arguing with Tommy, the structural contractor, about rebar specifications. He wanted to use grade 40 steel. I needed grade 60. Tommy kept insisting that grade 40 would pass inspection. He was technically correct. It would pass. But passing and perfection are not the same thing. I explained this to him using small words and hand gestures, the way you'd explain physics to a golden retriever. The building was designed to withstand not just the building codes, but the actual forces of nature. Earthquakes, wind shear, the slow, patient pressure time itself. He called me obsessive. I called him mediocre. We reached a compromise where he agreed to use grade 60, and I agreed to stop sending him 3 a.m. emails about bolt torque specifications. This was my element, standing in the skeleton of something that didn't exist yet, but would exist because I willed it into reality. Every beam placement, every weld point, every single structural decision flowed through my head first. Elena used a joke that I loved this building more than I loved her. She stopped joking about that 6 months ago. I left the site around 2 in the afternoon, earlier than usual. Tommy needed time to order the correct steel without me hovering over his shoulder like a neurotic hawk. The drive home took 40 minutes through Los Angeles traffic that moved like congealed blood through narrow arteries. My car was a German sedan, expensive, the kind with sound insulation, so complete that the outside world became theoretical. I could have been driving through a war zone and heard nothing but the gentle hum of the climate control system. That isolation felt like peace, like being inside a sensory deprivation tank, while traveling at 70 miles per hour. I pulled into the driveway of our house in Brentwood. 3,000 square feet. Spanish Revival architecture that I privately considered structurally derivative but aesthetically acceptable. The mortgage was steep but manageable, or so I thought. There was a FedEx truck idling at the curb. The driver was standing at my front door, finger hovering over the doorbell. He saw me exit the car and his face did that thing delivery people do when they realize they won't have to leave a missed delivery notice. Relief mixed with mild irritation. He walked toward me holding a cardboard envelope, the kind with the plastic window. He asked if I was Mark Vance. I confirmed this obvious fact. He thrust the tablet at me and told me I needed to sign for the delivery. The pen felt cheap in my hand. Plastic stylus on glass. I signed. He handed me the envelope and left without another word, already moving toward his truck with the efficiency of someone who had 200 more stops before sunset. I stood in the driveway, holding the envelope. It was heavier than normal mail. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Patterson, Caldwell and Associates. The kind of generic name that could mean anything from estate planning to corporate litigation. I opened it standing right there on the driveway. The first thing I saw was red ink, a stamp that screamed final notice in letters designed to trigger a fight-or-flight response in the human nervous system. Below that, in smaller but equally aggressive typography, the words Notice of Trustees Sale. I read the first paragraph, then the second. Then I started over and read it again more slowly because my brain was refusing to process the information correctly. Our house was being sold at auction in 48 hours. To satisfy a debt of $1.8 million that I knew nothing about. My pulse was 65 beats per minute. I checked because my watch tracks biometrics. 65, the same resting rate I had during normal conditions. This was interesting from a diagnostic standpoint. My body hadn't realized yet that we were in crisis mode. I walked inside. The house was empty. Elena was out, probably at one of her gallery events or charity luncheons, or whatever she did with her days. We'd stopped maintaining a shared calendar months ago. Our lives had become parallel lines. Same house, different trajectories. I went to my office, closed the door, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop, logged into our joint bank account. Password denied. I tried again, thinking I'd made a typo. Denied again. This was when my pulse climbed to 72. I used a recovery key. Every financial institution has a backup access protocol. Security questions. Verification code sent to my phone. It took 6 minutes to bypass Elena's password change and access the account history. What I found was architectural in its deception. Elegant, even. 3 home equity lines of credit. Helix. Each one taken out over the past 11 months. Each one using our house as collateral. The money had been transferred to something called Sterling Ventures, LLC. I didn't recognize the company name, but I recognized the signature pattern. The loans had been approved with forged documents showing my consent. I clicked on one of the loan documents, scanned down to the signature page. There was my name in handwriting that looked almost right, but wasn't quite. The angle of the M was wrong. Too vertical. Below it was a notary stamp. Jennifer A. Miller. Commission number visible in the embossed seal. I didn't know any Jennifer Miller, but I knew Derek used a specific mobile notary service for his rush jobs, the kind that asked fewer questions than they should. This wasn't just Elena panicking and making a bad decision. She'd sat in a room with a notary, smiled, signed papers, committed fraud with witnesses and official seals. This was federal, felony territory. The money was gone, drained, moved through shell accounts with the efficiency of water, finding the path of least resistance. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Sterling Ventures, LLC. The corporate registration was public record. The managing partner was Derek Sterling. Derek Sterling, my former business partner, the man who tried to buy me out of Vantage Point 8 months ago when he realized the property value would triple once construction finished. I'd refused his offer, told him the project wasn't for sale at any price. Apparently, he'd found another way. The front door opened. I heard Elena's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Expensive shoes. Probably new. Purchased with money that should have been paying down debt or sitting in our savings account, but was instead evaporating into whatever scheme Derek had sold her on. She called out asking if I was home. Her voice had that careful brightness people use when they're pretending everything is fine. I didn't answer. Just sat at my desk and waited for her to find me. She appeared in the doorway. Still beautiful. That hadn't changed. Dark hair pulled back. Silk blouse. Tailored pants. The kind of effortless elegance that came from having money and time and a personal shopper. I could smell her perfume from across the room. Something French. Expensive. But underneath it was something else. Alcohol. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to need courage for something. I placed a notice of trustee's sale on the desk between us. Didn't say anything. Just let her see it. Her face did something complicated. A micro-expression that lasted maybe half a second before she locked it down behind a mask of defensive anger. This told me everything I needed to know. She'd been expecting this, planning for it, maybe dreading it, but not surprised by it. She asked how I found out. This was her opening move. Not denial, not apology, just tactical assessment of information flow. I told her the delivery driver was very punctual. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, crossed her legs, smoothed her pants. These were buying time gestures. Her brain was working through response scenarios. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She told me I'd left her no choice. Said I was obsessed with that building, that I'd sunk every dollar we had into Vantage Point, while ignoring basic financial reality, that we were drowning, and I wasn't even looking at the water rising around us. I let her talk, didn't interrupt, just listened and cataloged every word. She said Derek had helped her refinance, that we would have lost the house anyway. That at least this way we'd have options. Her hands were moving while she talked. Defensive gestures. Palms up, like she was physically trying to push the guilt back toward me. She kept using the word refinance. Over and over, like it was a magic spell that could transform fraud into something legitimate. I asked her if Derek had explained his plan to her before or after she started sleeping with him. But even as I said it, I was processing the data. She'd said refinance. But Sterling Ventures wasn't a mortgage company. It was a shell corporation. Derek hadn't rescued her. He'd weaponized her desperation. This wasn't charity. It was a hostile takeover wrapped in concern, and she was too close to it to see the structure. She was naive, genuinely believed Derek was saving us. This made it worse somehow. If she'd been calculating, I could respect the strategy, but she'd been played. They both thought I was the mark. The silence that followed was absolute, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that happens right before structural failure, when all the hidden stresses suddenly become visible cracks. She didn't deny it. This was almost worse than confirmation. She just looked at me with this expression of defiant exhaustion, like she was tired of pretending, tired of maintaining the performance of our marriage. She told me I'd made my choice when I chose that building over everything else. Derek had been there when I wasn't. He'd listen when I couldn't. He'd offer her a partnership in every sense of the word. I asked her if she understood what would happen in 48 hours. Explained that the auction would sell our house for pennies on the dollar. That Derek's company would likely be the only bidder. That we'd lose everything and still the difference between the sale price and the debt. She said Derek had promised to take care of it. That he had a plan. I realized then that she actually believed this. She convinced herself that Derek Sterling was a rescue plan rather than her executioner. This was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. The human capacity for self-deception operating at peak efficiency. I closed my laptop, stood up, walked past her without another word. In the bedroom, I pulled down my go bag from the closet. I'd assembled it years ago during fire season. Passport, cash, external hard drives containing every design file and structural calculation I'd ever created. The entire digital architecture of my professional life compressed into 3 pounds of solid-state storage. Elena appeared in the doorway, asked where I was going. Her voice had shifted from defiant to uncertain. Maybe she expected me to rage, to break things, to behave like a normal human experiencing betrayal. But I wasn't feeling betrayed. I was feeling something else, a strange clarity, like the moment during a structural analysis when all the variables suddenly resolved into a single, elegant solution. I told her I was leaving, that she and Derek could have the house, could have the wreckage of our finances, could have whatever future they planned together. She asked what I was going to do. There was genuine worry in her voice now. Maybe she was realizing that calm Mark was more dangerous than angry Mark. I told her the truth. I didn't know yet, but I'd figure out. I walked through the house one last time, looked at the furniture we'd chosen together, the art on the walls. The kitchen where we used to cook Sunday dinners before work consumed everything. These were the physical artifacts of a life that had ended without my noticing when, in the office, I grabbed my laptop and the backup drives, left everything else. Photos, books, the expensive espresso machine. None of it mattered. At the front door, I took my house keys off the ring and placed them on an entry table. The metal made a small sound when it hit the wood. Final. Elena was crying now, asking me to wait, to talk about this, to not do anything rash. I told her there was nothing rash about what I was doing, that this was the most rational decision I'd made in years. I walked out to my car, threw the bag in the passenger seat, started the engine. The sound insulation wrapped around me again. The outside world became theoretical, distant. My pulse was 68 beats per minute, slightly elevated but within normal parameters. My hands were steady on the wheel. I pulled out of the driveway, didn't look back at the house, didn't look at Elena standing in the doorway, just drove. The night was clear. Los Angeles stretched out ahead of me in a grid of lights and possibilities. I had $3,000 in cash, a laptop, hard drives containing intellectual property worth millions if I could figure out how to leverage it, and 48 hours before everything I had built turned to ash. But here's the thing about structural failure. Sometimes a collapse reveals the actual load-bearing elements, shows you what was holding everything up and what was just decorative. I drove through the city with no destination in mind, just movement, just distance. The numbers were running through my head. Debt calculations, asset valuations, timeline projections. Data didn't lie. People did. But data was pure, clean, honest in its mathematics. I ended up at a coffee shop in Culver City, one of those 24-hour places that catered to insomniacs and screenwriters and people having personal crises at odd hours. I bought a large black coffee and sat in the corner with my laptop, opened a browser, started researching foreclosure law, home equity fraud, trustee sales, the legal mechanics of losing everything, but also intellectual property law, copyright registration, architectural design rights, the legal mechanics of protecting what couldn't be taken. The coffee was bitter and hot. I drank it without tasting it, just fuel for the processing that needed to happen. Because here's what Elena and Derek didn't understand, what they'd never understood. I didn't love the building. I loved the idea of the building, the mathematical perfection of it, the way every element supported every other element in a network of mutual dependence. And ideas couldn't be foreclosed on, couldn't be auctioned off to the highest bidder, couldn't be stolen without leaving evidence. I spent the next 6 hours documenting everything, every email exchange with Derek, every design iteration, every blueprint and calculation. I organized it with the same precision I use for structural engineering, build a digital fortress around my intellectual property. At 3 a.m, I checked my pulse again. 62 beats per minute, lower than when I'd left the house. This was interesting. I was calmer now than I'd been in months, maybe years, because I'd spent so long trying to hold everything together. The marriage, the business, the carefully constructed life. And now that it was collapsing, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The sky was starting to lighten when I finally closed the laptop. I sat there in the coffee shop, watching the sunrise through the window, thinking about load-bearing walls, about how sometimes you have to tear down the entire structure to see what's actually holding it up. I had 42 hours until the auction, 42 hours until I lost everything I thought mattered. But I was an engineer. I built things, and I was very good at understanding exactly how things break. I opened the laptop again, navigated to the United States Copyright Office website. The page loaded slowly on the coffee shop Wi-Fi. I sipped cold coffee and waited. Registration portal. Step one of however many steps this would take. I didn't need a lawyer yet. Lawyers look for settlements, compromises, ways to make everyone moderately unhappy instead of making one person completely destroyed. I wasn't interested in moderate outcomes. I pulled up my design files. Every blueprint, every structural calculation, every rendering of vantage point, the complete intellectual architecture of something that didn't exist yet, but would exist because I'd imagined it into reality. Derek thought he was stealing a building. He didn't understand he was stealing an idea. And ideas had protections he hadn't accounted for. I started filling out forms. Copyright classification, architectural works, date of creation. It was tedious, bureaucratic, perfect. I drove to a motel. Nothing fancy. Just clean sheets and functional Wi-Fi, and a door that locked. I needed sleep, needed to let my subconscious work on the problem, while my conscious mind rested, because Derek Sterling had made a mistake. A fundamental engineering error. He'd assumed that destroying the foundation would bring down the entire structure, but he'd forgotten to account for the architect. The Los Angeles County Courthouse sits on Hill Street like a monument to bureaucratic permanence. Concrete and glass. Steps that have been worn smooth by decades of people arriving for the worst days of their lives. Divorces, bankruptcies, foreclosures. I was there for a foreclosure. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. on the courthouse steps. This is how California does it. Public spectacle. Democracy of debt. Anyone can show up and bid on someone else's failure. I arrived at 9:30. The July heat was already brutal. That dry Los Angeles heat that makes everything feel like it's 2 degrees away from spontaneous combustion. The kind of heat where even breathing feels like work. There were maybe 30 people milling around. Professional vultures mostly. Real estate investors with clipboards and polo shirts. They attend these things the way some people attend garage sales, looking for value in other people's disasters. I was wearing a hoodie. Gray. Cheap. Something I bought at a Target on the way over. It was too hot for a hoodie, but I wanted the anonymity. Wanted to blend into the background. Just another face in the crowd of financial carnage witnesses. Nobody recognized me. Why would they? I was a ghost of my own life now. The auctioneer showed up at 9:50. Professional. Efficient. He had that rapid-fire voice auctioneers develop. The kind that turns human language into a rhythmic chant. Numbers and words compressed into pure velocity. He started with a property description. Our address in Brentwood. 3,000 square feet. Spanish Revival. Minimum bid set at $1.8 million to cover the debt. I watched the crowd. Saw a few people checking their phones. Running numbers. Calculating profit margins against renovation costs against market comparables. The bidding started. $1.8 million. The minimum. A man in a blue polo shirt raised his hand. 1.9. Someone else. 2 million. A woman with a leather portfolio. The numbers climbed slowly. Each increment felt like watching someone carve pieces off a corpse. This was my house. The place where Elena and I had hosted dinner parties. Where I'd spent Sunday mornings reading blueprints in my office. Where we'd talk about having kids someday, before someday turned into never. 2.2 million. 2.4. Then a man in the back raised his hand and said 2.5 million. I recognized him. Not personally, but I knew who he was. Derek's attorney. Or maybe just some LLC representative. Someone whose entire job was to show up at auctions and acquire distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. The auctioneer did his rapid-fire call. Going once. Going twice. Anyone else? Silence. The gavel came down. Sold for $2.5 million. Property with a market value of at least $15 million. Maybe more once construction on Vantage Point finished and increased the neighborhood desirability. I felt nothing. This should bother me more than it did. There should be grief or rage or something approximating normal human emotion. But all I felt was a distant curiosity, like watching a simulation of someone else's life collapse. The crowd dispersed quickly. The winners collected their paperwork. The losers drifted away to whatever comes after losing everything. I stood there for another 5 minutes, just looking at the courthouse steps. Then I walked back to my car. A Honda Civic I bought 2 days ago with cash. It was old, reliable, the kind of car that became invisible in Los Angeles traffic. Nobody looks at a beige Honda Civic and thinks anything except maybe that the driver is on their way to a middle management job they hate. Perfect. I drove to the construction site. Vantage Point. My masterpiece. The building I had poured 18 months of my life into was still just a skeleton of steel and concrete. Beautiful in its incompleteness. You could see the structural logic. The way forces would flow through the frame. The elegance of engineering, before aesthetics complicated everything. There were 2 cars already there when I arrived. A Mercedes and a Range Rover. Both black. Both expensive. Both screaming new money and bad taste. Derek and Elena. I parked down the block. Walked onto the site through the construction entrance. Nobody stopped me. There was no security yet. Just raw structure and empty spaces waiting to be filled with drywall and dreams. I could hear them before I saw them. Elena's laugh. Hi. Nervous. Excited. The sound of someone who thinks they've just won the lottery, but hasn't read the fine print yet. They were standing in what would eventually be the main living space. The view was insane from here. You could see all the way to downtown. The city spread out like a promise that might or might not be kept depending on your credit score and life choices. Derek saw me first. His face did something interesting. A flicker of surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been pity. He was wearing expensive casual, tailored jeans, designer polo, the uniform of men who convince themselves that money equals taste. He told me I shouldn't be here, that this was private property now. His voice had that false sympathy rich people use when they're pretending to care about the collateral damage of their success. I told him I was just collecting my tools, my personal equipment, laser levels, measuring instruments, the things I bought with my own money and left on site because this used to be my project. Elena looked away, couldn't meet my eyes. This told me everything I needed to know about her guilt tolerance. She could betray but couldn't watch. Derek relaxed, told me to take whatever I needed. He was magnanimous in victory. This is what winners do. They grant small mercies to the defeated because it makes them feel noble. Then he made his mistake. He started talking, explaining, the way people do when they need you to understand that what they did to you was actually reasonable, justified, maybe even good for you in some way you're too stupid to appreciate yet. He told me not to worry, said they were going to use my structural framework, that the engineering was solid, brilliant even, but they'd modify the exterior, change the facade, make it more cost-effective, more marketable. He said they'd save millions by using my design, but changing enough details that I couldn't claim royalties, that my vision was beautiful but impractical for their budget, that real estate was a business, and I'd always treated it like art. Elena was nodding along, like she'd heard this speech before, like they'd practiced this conversation. How to explain to the genius why his genius wasn't worth paying for. I asked if that was legal. Using someone else's architectural design without compensation. Derek laughed, actually laughed, told me that intellectual property law was complicated, gray areas everywhere, that I could try to sue but litigation was expensive and I was broke and good luck finding a lawyer to work on contingency for something this speculative. He was right, on paper, in the conventional understanding of how power works. But he'd made an assumption, a fatal engineering error. He'd assumed I thought like he did, that everything came down to cost-benefit analysis, risk versus reward, that I'd evaluate the odds and walk away because the smart move was accepting defeat. He didn't understand that I wasn't playing the same game anymore. I nodded, told him that made sense, thanked him for explaining it to me, picked up my tools and left. Elena called after me, asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. Her voice had that performative concern people use when they want to feel like they're being kind, without actually doing anything kind. I told her I was fine, that I hoped they'd be happy here, that the building would be everything they wanted. I meant it too, because I wanted them to finish it, wanted them to pour money into completion, wanted them to get so invested that backing out would be unthinkable. The drive back to the motel took 40 minutes. Traffic was light. Everyone was at work, producing value for someone else's portfolio, paying rent to someone else's investment strategy. The American dream compressed into a commute and a direct deposit. The motel was called Motel 6. They leave the light on for you. This is their slogan. It's supposed to be comforting, but really it just means they've accepted that their entire business model is desperation and convenience. My room was on the second floor, facing the parking lot. The carpet was industrial, stain-resistant, the kind that could absorb decades of transient sadness and still look the same shade of brown. I could hear my neighbors through the walls, a couple fighting about money, about whose fault it was they couldn't afford rent. Their voices were muffled, but the emotional content was clear. Accusations, denials, the same argument playing out in different words, but identical patterns. This was the sound of downward mobility, the frequency of failure. And I was part of the chorus now. But here's the thing. I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. When you have nothing left to lose, the equation changes. Risk becomes meaningless. Consequences become theoretical. You can make moves that would be insane for someone with something to protect. I opened my laptop. The screen glow was the only light in the room. I'd left the curtains closed. Didn't want to see the parking lot or the freeway or any reminder of where I was in the geography of American failure. I navigated to the U.S. Copyright Office website. The interface was government standard, functional but not friendly. Forms and instructions written in that special bureaucratic language designed to make simple things sound complicated. I'd started the registration process 2 nights ago. Now I needed to finish it. Architectural works. Copyright classification. They teach you about AWCPA in first-year architecture school. The Architectural Works Copyright Protection Act, passed in 1990. Everyone learns it. Almost everyone forgets it. Because most disputes get handled through professional reputation, through whisper networks and blacklisting. Nobody actually uses the nuclear option. I was about to press the red button. I uploaded the files. Every blueprint, every structural calculation, every rendering, the complete digital DNA of Vantage Point. 3-dimensional models showing exactly how the building was supposed to look, how the spaces flowed, how the structural elements created the aesthetic elements. The upload took 17 minutes. The motel Wi-Fi was slow. I watched the progress bar. 94%, 96%, 98%. Through the wall. My neighbors had moved from fighting to a different kind of noise. The rhythmic sounds of people trying to fix their relationship with physical proximity instead of emotional honesty. It would work until it didn't. Then they'd be back to fighting. 99%, 100%. Done. I filled out the rest of the form. Paid the filing fee with a credit card that still had room on it. Click Submit. The confirmation page loaded. Application received. Registration pending. Official certificate would arrive in approximately 6 months, but the registration date would be backdated to today's submission. This was key, the registration date, because now I had proof. Official government documentation that I'd created this design, that it was mine, that any use of it without permission was infringement. But I needed more than just copyright registration. I needed proof of intent. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app. I'd been recording when Derek made his confession. The entire conversation, him explaining how they were going to use my framework, but modify the exterior, how they designed the strategy specifically to avoid paying me, how my work was valuable but not valuable enough to compensate. This was willful infringement, not accidental, not innocent, deliberate theft with premeditation. The difference in damages was exponential. Regular copyright infringement might get you actual damages. Willful infringement could get you statutory damages up to $150,000 per work, plus attorney fees. But more importantly, willful infringement of architectural copyright could get you an injunction, a court order to stop construction, or, in extreme cases, to demolish what had been built. This was my leverage. Not money, control. I saved the audio file to 3 different locations: cloud backup, external drive, email to myself, the holy trinity of digital preservation. Then I opened a calendar app, started doing math, construction timeline. Derek would want to move fast. He bought the property cheap, had financing in place, would want to finish and flip before interest rates or market conditions changed. Probably looking at 12 to 18 months to completion. I needed to let him build. This was counterintuitive. Every instinct said to file the lawsuit immediately. Stop him now. But that was emotional thinking. Tactical thinking said wait. Because if I sued now, he could stop construction, walk away, take the loss on the property, but avoid the bigger loss of completing a building he couldn't sell. But if I waited until the building was nearly finished, he'd be pot committed. Too much money invested to quit. The building itself would become a hostage, a $15 million liability he couldn't liquidate because it was tangled in litigation. I looked at the calendar, marked the date 14 months from now. That would be cutting it close. He'd be near completion, deep into finishes, past the point of no return financially. That's when I'd file. I typed a note to myself. Let them build. Let them invest. Let them think they've won. The couple next door had gone quiet, either reconciled or exhausted. Probably exhausted. Reconciliation takes energy that people in motels rarely have. I closed the laptop, lay back on the bed, The mattress was thin. I could feel the box spring through it, but I'd slept on worse. My phone buzzed. Email notification. Elena. The subject line was just my name. Mark. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. It would be some combination of apology and justification, explaining why what she did was somehow my fault, how I'd left her no choice, how Derek had been there when I wasn't. The narrative people tell themselves to justify betrayal is always the same. I'm not the villain. I'm the victim who had to make hard choices. You'll understand someday. I deleted it without reading. There's a philosophical concept called sunk cost fallacy. The idea that people continue investing in something because they've already invested so much that quitting feels like admitting waste. It's irrational but deeply human. Derek was about to learn this lesson in the most expensive way possible. He'd bought my house for cheap, felt smart, felt like a winner. Now he'd spend the next year pouring millions into finishing my design, getting deeper and deeper into a project that was legally toxic, and he wouldn't know until it was too late. Because he'd made the classic mistake. He'd thought the hard part was acquiring the asset. Didn't realize the asset was booby-trapped. I set an alarm on my phone. 6 a.m. I needed to find work. Something simple. Something that paid enough to keep me in motel rooms and cheap food while I waited for Derek to finish digging his own grave. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was an MIT-trained structural engineer, living in a motel with walls so thin, I could hear strangers disappointing each other, waiting tables or doing consulting work, or whatever would pay cash and not ask too many questions. This was rock bottom, the absolute nadir of professional achievement, and I'd never felt more dangerous in my life. Because here's what Derek didn't understand, what Elena didn't understand, what nobody who'd ever bet against me understood. I didn't need money. I needed time, and time was the one thing I had infinite amounts of now. I could wait, could watch, could document every decision they made, every modification to my design, every cost overrun and timeline delay, building a case with the patience of someone who had nothing else to do. Derek thought he'd bought a building. He'd actually bought a lawsuit with construction timeline. The parking lot outside was quiet. Occasional car passing on the freeway. The white noise of a city that never actually sleeps but pretends between the hours of 2 and 5 a.m. I thought about my old life, the house, the marriage, the illusion of stability and success. How much energy I'd spent trying to hold it all together. How exhausting it had been to maintain the performance of having my life figured out. This was better, simpler, pure, one goal, one target, one absolutely clear objective. I pulled up the Copyright Office confirmation email on my phone. Read it again. Application submitted. Registration pending. The first move in a long game. Derek was about to learn that in chess, sometimes the most dangerous piece is the one you forgot was on the board. I closed my eyes. Let the sounds of the motel wash over me. The hum of the ice machine. The distant freeway. The couple next door starting another argument. This was the sound of America. People struggling, surviving, doing whatever it took to make it to tomorrow. I was one of them now, and that made me far more dangerous than I'd ever been when I had something to lose. 14 months is a long time to wait when you know exactly what's coming. I spent that time working. Nothing glamorous. Building safety consulting. Inspecting commercial properties for code violations. The kind of work where you show up in a polo shirt with a clipboard and nobody remembers your face 10 minutes after you leave. I drove a 2008 Honda Civic. Beige. Invisible. The automotive equivalent of camouflage in suburban America. I lived in a studio apartment in Culver City. 600 square feet. IKEA furniture. The life of someone who'd given up or was starting over, depending on how you looked at it. But every few weeks, I'd drive past a construction site, watch Vantage Point grow from skeleton to structure to something that looked almost finished, watch Derek's vision of my design take shape in cheap materials and compromised details. It was like watching someone perform surgery on a body you used to inhabit. The building grew. Steel frame, concrete floors, glass and facade work. I documented everything. took photos from public streets, noted every design element that matched my registered blueprints, built a case file that grew thicker every month. Elena did interviews. I saw them online. Architectural Digest, Dwell Magazine. She talked about her vision for modern California living, about how she'd always dreamed of creating spaces that merged indoor and outdoor seamlessly, about her partnership with Derek Sterling and their shared commitment to innovative residential design. She never mentioned my name once. This was fine, better than fine. Every interview was evidence. Every public claim of authorship was another nail. I kept a calendar on my wall, marked off days like a prisoner, counting down to release. Except I wasn't waiting to get out. I was waiting to strike. The construction timeline matched my projections almost perfectly. Derek was efficient. I'd give him that. He moved fast. Didn't waste money on delays. Probably because every month of interest on his construction loans was eating into potential profit. By month 12, the building was substantially complete. Exterior done. Interior finishes in progress. The kind of stage where you could see what it would become, where potential buyers could walk through and imagine their furniture in the space. By month 14, it was ready for market. I saw the listing go live on a Tuesday morning. The Sterling Heights, listed at $45 million. The photos were professional. Drone shots showing the building against the LA skyline. Interior shots with stage furniture and perfect lighting. It looked like something out of a magazine. It looked exactly like what I designed. The listing copy mentioned the architects. Sterling Design Group. Elena Vance. No mention of Mark Vance. I'd been erased from my own creation like a Soviet photograph. I saved screenshots of everything, added them to my case file. Then I made a phone call. The attorney I'd hired 3 months earlier was named Rebecca Chun, intellectual property specialist. She'd reviewed my copyright registration, listened to the audio recording of Derek's admission, examined the construction photos, and compared them to my blueprints. She'd told me I had a case, a strong one, possibly the strongest willful infringement claim she'd seen in architectural copyright. I told her it was time. She filed the lawsuit that afternoon. Federal court. Copyright infringement. But she didn't just file a complaint. She filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. This was the nuclear option. You don't ask for a TRO unless you can prove immediate and irreparable harm. Unless you can convince a judge that waiting even a few days for a normal hearing would cause damage that money couldn't fix. Rebecca was very good at her job. The Sterling Heights had a grand opening party scheduled for that Friday evening. I knew this because it was all over social media. Elena had posted about it. Derek's company had sent out press releases. They were inviting potential buyers, real estate investors, tech executives with more money than sense. The kind of people who bought $45 million houses as investment properties or tax shelters. I didn't go to the party. That would have been petty. Dramatic. The kind of thing people do in movies when they want everyone to watch them win. But I made sure someone else went. The process servers arrived at 7:15, right in the middle of cocktail hour. 2 people in business casual carrying leather portfolios. They looked like they could have been guests. Investors. Nobody's first instinct is to assume the well-dressed people are there to serve legal papers. They found Derek on the main terrace. He was holding court, champagne in hand, explaining the design choices to a group of people who were pretending to understand architecture. Elena was next to him, playing the gracious hostess. They looked successful, powerful, like people who'd figured out how to work the system. The process servers identified themselves, asked Derek Sterling to confirm his identity, then handed him the documents. I wasn't there, but Rebecca told me later what happened, how the conversations around Derek went quiet, how people's faces changed when they realized something was wrong, how Derek's expression went from confusion to comprehension to something that looked like panic. The temporary restraining order was 12 pages long. Most of it was legal language, but the key part was simple. The court had found sufficient evidence of copyright infringement to warrant an immediate freeze on all commercial activity related to property. No sales, no marketing, No transfer of ownership. Nothing until a full hearing could be held. The order cited the registered copyright, the audio recording, the photographic evidence showing substantial similarity between the built structure and protected design. It cited precedent from other architectural copyright cases. It cited the Architectural Works Copyright Protection Act. It was airtight. Derek read it standing on the terrace of a building he'd just spent 18 months and approximately $28 million completing. A building he couldn't sell, couldn't leverage, couldn't do anything with except pay property taxes and watch the construction loans accumulate interest. The party died quickly after that. People made excuses. Investors suddenly remembered other appointments. The caterers kept working because they'd been paid in advance, but the guests stopped eating. By 8 o'clock, the terrace was empty except for Derek and Elena and half-empty champagne glasses reflecting the city lights. The story hit the real deal by Saturday morning. LA Times picked it up by afternoon. Architectural copyright dispute. Allegations of theft. $45 million property frozen by court order. The headline in the real deal was perfect. Masterpiece or stolen copy. Copyright claim freezes Sterling Heights sale. They included photos, comparison shots showing the built structure next to renderings from my registered copyright. The similarities were obvious even to non-architects. Same proportions, same structural logic, same spatial relationships, just cheaper exterior materials. The article quoted Rebecca. She'd given them a statement about protecting intellectual property rights, about how architectural design was art, about how the law needed to defend creators against theft. They'd tried to reach Derek for comment. His office had declined to respond. I read the articles sitting in my studio apartment, drank coffee from a chipped mug, watched my phone light up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in over a year, former colleagues, other architects, people who'd heard the story and wanted to know if it was true. I didn't respond to any of them. Wasn't interested in being celebrated or vindicated. This wasn't about professional reputation. This was about structural consequences. Rebecca called me that evening, told me Derek's attorney had reached out. They wanted to talk, wanted to see if we could resolve this without going to trial. I told her to set up a meeting. The conference room was in one of those glass tower law firms in Century City, 50th floor. Views that made $45 million houses look quaint. Everything was expensive and neutral. Gray carpet, glass table, leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Derek looked terrible. Not physically. He was still wearing expensive clothes. Still had the appearance of success. But something in his face had collapsed. The confidence was gone, replaced by the expression of someone who just realized how badly they'd miscalculated. Elena was there too, sitting next to Derek, but somehow separate, like she was present but trying to maintain distance. She wouldn't look at me. Derek's attorney was exactly what you'd expect. Expensive suit, careful language, the kind of lawyer who gets paid $800 an hour to find ways out of impossible situations. He started by suggesting this was all a misunderstanding, that Derek had merely been inspired by my work, that inspiration wasn't theft, that architecture was inherently collaborative and influences were impossible to trace. Rebecca let him talk. Then she opened her laptop and played the audio recording. Derek's voice, clear, unmistakable, explaining how they were going to use my structural framework, how they'd modified just enough to avoid paying royalties, how my design was brilliant but too expensive for their budget. The room went very quiet after that. Rebecca laid out the case. Copyright registration, dated 2 days after Derek bought my house at auction. Photographic evidence showing 90% structural similarity. Audio evidence proving willful intent. Expert analysis confirming that the built structure was substantially identical to protected design. She explained what willful infringement meant. Statutory damages up to $150,000 per violation. Attorney fees. And most importantly, the possibility of injunctive relief. Derek's attorney asked what we wanted. His voice had lost its confidence. This was the sound of someone preparing for bad news. Rebecca told him we were seeking an injunction for demolition. that we wanted the court to order the building destroyed, that anything less would reward theft and set a dangerous precedent for intellectual property protection. Derek made a sound, not quite a word, something between a gasp and a denial. His attorney tried to argue, said demolition was extreme, that it would be economically wasteful, that surely we could reach a reasonable financial settlement. Rebecca smiled, said that financial settlements were for cases where the defendant showed good faith, where the infringement was accidental or minor, where the parties could find middle ground. She said this wasn't that kind of case. She said we were willing to let a judge decide, that we were confident in our evidence, that we were prepared to spend the next 3 to 5 years in litigation, if necessary, that every month the building sat frozen was another month of interest on Derek's construction loans, another month of property taxes, another month of opportunity cost. She asked how long Derek could afford to wait. That's when Derek broke. Not physically, but you could see it happen. The moment when the math became real, when he understood that fighting would cost more than surrendering, that his smartest move was accepting total defeat. He asked how much we wanted. His voice was rough. Desperate, he threw out numbers. 5 million, 10 million, 15. Rebecca looked at me. This was my moment, my line. I told him I wanted $28 million, the full cost of construction, plus documented expenses, plus public acknowledgement of authorship, plus full rights to the property and the design. I told him he'd get 0. No profit, no equity, no credit. He'd walk away with exactly what he'd started with. Nothing. Derek's attorney tried to argue, said it was unreasonable, that Derek had invested years of work, that he deserved something for his efforts. I told him that Derek deserved exactly what he'd tried to give me, recognition for work that wasn't his, compensation that reflected actual value. The difference was I had law on my side. The negotiation took 6 hours. Derek's attorney tried to find angles, tried to negotiate down, tried to structure it as a partnership or licensing deal, anything that would let Derek save face or salvage some value. But Rebecca had done the math. She knew exactly how much Derek had borrowed, knew his interest rates, knew his cash position. She knew he couldn't afford to fight, couldn't afford to wait, couldn't afford anything except total capitulation. By midnight, we had an agreement. $28 million. Wire transfer within 48 hours. Full transfer of property rights. Public statement acknowledging my authorship and design ownership. Derek's name removed from all marketing materials and press releases. The Sterling Heights would be renamed, or demolished, or sold. That would be my decision. Derek signed. His hand was shaking. Elena sat there silent through the whole thing. She'd stopped being relevant hours ago. This was between Derek and me now. The wire transfer came through on Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca called to confirm. $28 million. Minus her fees and costs. Minus taxes. But still more money than I'd ever imagined having. I sat in my studio apartment and looked at the bank balance on my laptop screen. All those zeros. Proof that waiting works. That patience is a weapon. That sometimes the best revenge is just being better at math than your enemies. I didn't feel euphoric. Didn't feel vindicated. Felt something closer to completion. Like finishing a complex proof. Like watching a structure stand up under load testing exactly as the calculations predicted it would. I saw Elena one more time. Didn't plan it. Just happened. I was leaving the parking garage after signing the final documents at Rebecca's office. Getting into my new car. Not a Ferrari or Porsche, a Lexus LS. Reliable, comfortable, the kind of car that said I had money but wasn't trying to prove anything. Elena was waiting by the elevator. She'd been inside, maybe trying to see me, maybe just waiting to talk. She asked if we could talk. Her voice was careful, tentative, the way you'd approach something fragile or potentially dangerous. I told her there was nothing to talk about. She said we'd been a good team once. That she'd made mistakes, that Derek had manipulated her, that she'd been desperate and scared and made bad choices. This was probably true. All of it. But truth and relevance aren't the same thing. I told her she'd made a calculation error, that she'd bet on short-term rescue over long-term architecture, that she'd chosen someone who promised easy solutions over someone who built things that lasted. I told her the math had worked exactly as expected, just not in the direction she predicted. She asked what I was going to do now, if I was going to keep the building or sell it, if I was going to stay in Los Angeles or leave. I told her I didn't know yet, that I was still running the calculations. This was true. I had options now, resources, time, the freedom that comes from having nothing to lose, and enough money that the next mistake wouldn't destroy you. I got in my car, started the engine. The sound system was good, better than the old Honda. I queued up an audiobook. Something about probability theory and decision-making seemed appropriate. Elena stood in the parking garage, watching me, waiting for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or closure, or some sign that the past mattered. But the past was just data now. Information I'd processed and converted into present circumstances. You don't forgive structural failure. You just understand why it happened and design better systems next time. I pulled out of the parking space, drove toward the exit, didn't look back. I took Pacific Coast Highway north, toward Malibu, toward nothing in particular. Just wanted to drive, to feel the car move, to watch the ocean and think about what came next. The sun was starting to set, turning the water orange and gold. The kind of California sunset that made people want to write songs or take photographs or believe in fresh starts. I didn't believe in fresh starts. Believed in accumulated data and adjusted variables. Believed in learning from structural failures and building better frameworks. But I appreciated the sunset anyway. Aesthetic value independent of symbolic meaning. The audiobook narrator was talking about game theory, about how the optimal strategy depends on whether you're playing a finite game or an infinite game. Finite games have winners and losers, endpoints, clear victory conditions. Infinite games just continue. The goal isn't winning. It's staying in play, adapting, surviving, building systems that last longer than individual outcomes. I'd spent 14 months playing a finite game, clear objective, defined endpoint, measurable victory. Now I was back in the infinite game, the one where you figure out what to build next, how to use resources, what problems are worth solving. I drove past Vantage Point. Couldn't help it. The building was visible from PCH, sitting up in the hills. Still beautiful. Still my design. Mine now officially, legally, completely. I could sell it. Probably get $40 million if I waited for the right buyer. Could demolish it and build something else. Could keep it and live there. Could turn it into a museum or a monument to the value of documentation and patience. Or I could just drive. Keep going north. Figure out the next problem. The next structure. The next equation that needed solving. The thing about engineering is that it's never really finished. You complete one project and immediately see 12 ways it could have been better. 12 new problems to solve. 12 variations to test. Life worked the same way. You solve one problem and discover 3 more hiding behind it. The work never ends. The calculations never stop. You just get better at running them. I drove until the sunset turned to darkness. Until Los Angeles was just lights in the rearview mirror. Until the only sound was the road and the audiobook narrator explaining Nash equilibriums and optimal strategy. Somewhere around Oxnard, I realized I was smiling, not from happiness exactly, from satisfaction, from a feeling you get when all the variables align, when the structure stands exactly as predicted, when the math works out. Derek had tried to steal my design, thought he could shortcut the process, use my foundation, and claim the credit. But he'd forgotten something fundamental, something they teach you in first-year engineering. You can't build on a stolen foundation. Eventually, the structure fails. And when it does, everyone sees exactly who was holding up all along. I kept driving, north, toward San Francisco or Portland, or nowhere in particular. The road was empty. The car was comfortable. The audiobook had moved on to discussing decision theory and Bayesian probability. I had $26 million. a Lexus with good sound insulation, a copyright portfolio worth protecting, and absolutely no obligations except the ones I chose to accept. This was freedom, not the kind they sell in advertisements. Not retirement on a beach or luxury without purpose. The freedom to choose the next problem, to decide what was worth building, to play the infinite game on my own terms. Derek had tried to teach me that success was about shortcuts and leverage and taking what you could get before someone took it from you. Instead, he taught me something else, that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so good that everyone knows exactly who built it, and then getting paid exactly what it's worth. The Pacific stretched out dark and infinite to my left. The highway unwound ahead like a proof waiting to be solved. The audiobook narrator was explaining something about entropy and information theory. I turned the volume up, kept driving, didn't look back.